Authorizing. 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 User confirmed you have requested access to general knowledge of the G.A.P. Possibly the most influential event in galactic history, the G.A.P is a multiverse-spanning absence in memory and recorded history, reaching as far back as untold millennia. This event occurred 317 galactic standard years ago. The genesis of this event is when the memory and informational inconsistencies began. The G.A.P affected more than just the living memory of those living through those times, it also affected written accounts, computer databases, and art. For those that lived through it, they found that their episodic memory was more or less intact, but that their semantic memory was riddled with blank spaces. For example, a person would remember who their spouse is, how they felt about them, the names of their children, where they worked, what their occupation was and how to do it, who their friends were, how to get around town, their favorite place to eat, and generalities about their culture. However, they might have struggled with remembering the name of the country they live in, how they met their spouse, and large chunks of historical information. It has been 317 years since the G.A.P took place. Shorter-lived races like humans, Isoki, and Shurens have adapted and even thrived since the G.A.P, because many of the shorter-lived races saw this as a new start after a generation or two. Many of the longer-lived races like elves, dwarves, and gnomes still struggle to cope with their fragmented memories from before the G.A.P, just like their shorter-lived counterparts 3 centuries prior. As stated before, even recorded information is fragmented and unreliable. Historical texts, various forms of entertainment, and official records all become unreliable around the time of the G.A.P. For example, a treasure hunter may find an old history book from a pre-G.A.P ruin and find it blank except for a few disjointed words and pictures. Or an old holo documentary could talk about how one faction was the victor in a conflict, and on the next viewing it would say that another faction won. Even supernatural sources of knowledge are unable to provide further information. When either gods or daemons are petitioned about information regarding the G.A.P, they are all either equally silent or avoid the topic entirely. Most of the information gained this way was when groups of priests or cultists asked about lost Golarion. All groups were given a message that went along the lines of Golarion still exists, as do the descendants of those people on it when it vanished, safe in a seclusion unreachable by magic or science. This has spawned 2 equally terrifying theories. The first is that something so terrible happened that the gods and demons can't tell us to keep some unknowable form of cosmic status quo. The second reason would be that even they are largely affected by the G.A.P as the rest of us are, and are being mysterious in an attempt to save face. There are 2 main theories of what could have caused the G.A.P. The first is that somehow the invention of drift travel caused the G.A.P because of how it warps space-time, and the effect is only compounded by the sheer volume of drift travel. Even though drift travel was created after the G.A.P, supporters say that there could be some form of ripple effect where because of the bending of space-time, the effect would come before the cause. The second leading theory is that the cause of the G.A.P is either directly tied to, or at the very least closely related to Golarion disappearing. So far there are only 2 known things that could have caused Golarion to vanish like it did. The first thing is that it could have been somehow caused by Rovagig, a dark god of destruction that was trapped in the core of the planet. The second thing that could have caused it would have been the Starstone, an artifact of immense power that was said to be able to allow mortals to achieve apotheosis and ascend to godhood. However, this is all just conjecture given the nature of the G.A.P and our limited knowledge. Below is a summary of how each of the Pact Worlds fared throughout and was largely affected by the G.A.P. For additional information, please refer to our other planetary entries. The Sun, commonly referred to as the Burning Mother. In the year 217 AG, scholars from the Church of Serenre discovered strange anomalous readings from the Sun. Upon further investigation, it was discovered that these readings were in fact large abandoned cities. These cities are protected by gargantuan magic shields, and when approaching the cities, a large magical tunnel appeared, allowing them access to these cities, safe from the extreme heat and gravity of the Sun. After the discovery, the Church of Serenre made it their top priority to find out as much as they could about these cities. However, even today there is still precious little information about who built these cities, why they did so, the techniques for building them, and why they were abandoned. All that is known about them is that, whoever they were very technologically advanced, and extremely skilled in the magic arts. Aballon, commonly called the Forge. This world has very little in the way of atmosphere, or an environment that can support biological life. However, a form of artificial life did come into being, because of a mysterious race called the First Ones. The First Ones built the planet's technological denizens and then disappeared into the stars, but for some unknown reason left most if not all of their infrastructure behind, along with their AI and drones. After being left abandoned, but still functional, the advanced drones and AIs and eventually gained sentience and have over time created what could be called an artificial ecosystem, complete with prey, predator, and sentient machines. These sentient are largely split into two groups. The first group is referred to as those who wait. This group continues to upgrade themselves and stockpile wealth and resources in the belief that the First Ones will eventually return and that all of Aballon must be ready to receive them when they do. The second group is referred to as those who become. This group believes that their destiny is to take on the mantle of the First Ones and colonize new worlds themselves. Castrovel, commonly referred to as the Wild. This planet is the home world of the Lashunta. Little is known about the pre-G.A.P history of this world, besides the fact that elves from Golarion used magic portals called Idari, or more commonly known as elf gates. During the pre-G.A.P era, Absalom Station, commonly called the Nexus. When the G.A.P occurred, there were several notable anomalies that were unique to Absalom Station. The first anomaly is that Absalom Station took the orbit that Golarion would have taken. The second anomaly is that when the chaos of the G.A.P died down, scholars realized that the massive station was very old, and had existed for possibly thousands of years. The third anomaly is that the power source of Absalom Station is in fact the legendary artifact called the Starstone. A magical artifact of such immense power that it can aid in the apotheosis of a mortal. The fourth anomaly is that when using a drift drive, Absalom Station is never more than 1 day away. Akiton, often referred to as the battlefield by its residents. This once prosperous, powerful planet is now in a drastic decline, and is reflected both environmentally and economically, and politically. From what little pre-G.A.P records that we have available, Akiton used to be a bustling economic zone that was built on the mining of Thasteron. Thasteron is a key ore used in sub-FTL travel, and before drift travel was the primary fuel used by all starships. However, once drift drives were invented, this caused a sharp decline in the value of Thasteron. In the span of a few generations, rich and powerful Thasteron barons suddenly found themselves destitute and needing to hunt bottom-feeding vermin to just survive. Verces, commonly known as the Line. Verces is a tidally locked world, with no day or night cycle. The only civilization is an old pre-G.A.P government called the Ring of Nations, which is located around the Twyla Terminator of the planet. The Twyla Terminator is the only area on the planet that is either not burning hot or freezing cold. Outside of the Twyla Terminator, are large expanses of wilderness only inhabited by stubborn nomads or outlaws, and is infrequently dotted with strange pre-G.A.P ruins. The most notable of these ruins is Akiton, Area of the Sun, and is a tube-like spire that reaches from deep into the mantle to high into the sky. Akiton has so far not been fully explored. All serious expeditions only end in strange and garbled transmissions about winged creatures in the depths. Before the G.A.P, the native Vertani on the planet were famous for their pre-drift space exploration. Vertani ship design is reminiscent of ancient dirigibles. Idari, commonly known as the Renewal. The Idari, the largest ship ever made by the Kazith, and is an ancient sub-light generational colony ship, that was launched from the Kasathan home world of Kazith shortly after the G.A.P. This was done to establish a new home world so that they could escape Kazith's dying star. They were told by a plane-hopping race called the Witchwords of a planet that would be perfect for the Kazith to colonize. That planet was Akiton. However, one thing that the Witchwords did not account for was the hundreds of years that it would take to build the Idari, and the technological advances that Akiton would enjoy. When the first Kazithans arrived at Akiton, they found that the planet was too well defended to merely conquer or settle on. When this was discovered, the Idari's senior officers decided to have the ship orbit between Verces and the Dispora. The Diaspora, commonly known as the Lost Ones. The Diaspora was formed when the twin planets of Damar and Lovo collided together, creating a massive debris field. According to the beliefs of the descendants of the twin planets called the Sarcassians, this was caused by an ancient pre-G.A.P rivalry with the planet of Eox. Even though this does coincide with Eochian legends, there is no hard proof to back these claims up. Eox, commonly known as the Dead World. Long before the G.A.P, ancient astronomers from what would become the Pact Worlds tracked the retrograde orbit of Eox and saw it as a ill omen. From the limited records that we have, Eox used to be a lush world inhabited by a race known as the Elebrians, who by what records we have were highly skilled in the magical and scientific arts. As stated earlier, Eochian legend states that they caused the Dispora to be created by shattering the twin worlds of Damar and Lovo, for not acknowledging their supremacy. And that the magical and or technological biased weapon they used destroyed the planet's ecosystem and most of the Elebrians on the planet. Those that survived did so in magical bunkers, and even those who survived were rendered largely infertile. Because of this, the surviving Elebrians turned to necromancy to live on, in a state of undeath. However, there is a small percentage of Elebrians who are still living, but are largely treated as second-class citizens, and live in an artificial settlement called the Halls of the Living. Triaxus, commonly known as the Wanderer. Triaxus's slow orbit means that for many standard years it is an extremely cold planet, and for many standard years it is an extremely hot planet, causing many of its generations to live and die in one season, with an ecosystem that adapts accordingly, as of the creation of this article Triaxus is in the middle of one of its winter cycles. During the G.A.P for unknown reasons a large group of elves immigrated to Triaxus and established their own colonies. Since modern times some of the ruling class of dragons on Triaxus have undergone genetic manipulation to make themselves small enough to fit on large enough starships. Another thing that the draconic corporations of Triaxus have done to spread their reach is to create a hybrid race called the Dragon Keen. This hybrid race is small enough to fit in any commercial starship and make use of equipment that any other humanoid could fit in, while still retaining enough of their draconic traits to clearly show their lineage. Liavara, commonly known as the Dreamer. Liavara's oldest and most prominent inhabitants are referred to as the Dreamers. The Dreamers were originally Barathu explorers from Bretheda, who came to Liavara for a now forgotten purpose long before the G.A.P. However, what is known is that living on Liavara changed the Barathu, so that they now no longer have the same level of cooperation as their Barathu and have lost the ability to merge to overcome obstacles, but have gained the ability to sing preternatural songs with prophetic qualities. This is proven in the few pre-G.A.P records that survive, in which the Dreamers predicted the G.A.P itself. Bretheda, commonly known as the Cradle. Bretheda is the largest gas giant in the system, and has dozens of moons, some of which are roughly the size of planets. Bretheda is controlled by a being known as Confluence, which is the result of many Barathu merging together, pooling their collective intelligence, wisdom, and skills and knowledge, and rules over the numerous floating settlements on Bretheda as well as the moons that surround it. Since the formation of the Pact Worlds, Confluence has been made a member of the Pact Council. Apostae, commonly known as the Messenger. Apostae is home to the race known as the Drow, though actually being natives to Golarion, the Drow have lived on Apostae since before the G.A.P. Much of this world is still unknown, and some scholars believe that the world itself is artificial. These theories are given credence by the fact that Apostae has no atmosphere or geological components like tectonic plates or planetary core. One of the other mysteries of Apostae is the fate of the planet's original inhabitants, the Ili. What is known is that long before the G.A.P Apostae was riddled with warrens and secret vaults, that despite the modern Drow's best attempts still remain unexplored. What is known is that after the G.A.P the Drow found themselves in the comfortable position of being the rulers of this world and maintain that they do not know what happened to the Ili. Whether the Drow truly do not know what happened to the Ili or if the Drow drove them off of the planet, remains a highly controversial topic. Aucturn, commonly known as the Stranger. The world of Aucturn is objectively the strangest and most unsettling world in the Pact system, if not in all of the galaxy. Aucturn is constantly affected by a massive illusion that throws off all long-range scans with the exception that readings regarding its mass and diameter are usually consistent. An example of how a reading can differ is that while one ship will see Aucturn as a gas giant, but another scan will show Aucturn as a solid lifeless rock, only when approaching orbit can Aucturn be seen for what it truly is. Upon closer examination, Aucturn is a strangely organic and poisonous world. Many scholars have noticed the Aucturn seems to expand and contract, similarly to how an organism would breathe in and out. It is unknown exactly how long Aucturn has been like this, but from the fragmentary records we have, concerning the conflicts on Aucturn, it has been this way a very long time. The most significant conflict on Aucturn is a feud going back at least a millennium between various followers of the Outer Gods and the Dominion of the Black. Although the cause of the feud is unknown, We do know that the conflict became an all-out war around the time of the G.A.P and has continued to the present day. This concludes the end of this data file on the G.A.P. What do you think caused the G.A.P? Is there any important information that is not listed above? If so, please post a comment below and our archival team will endeavor to add the correction. Remember to like this data file, share it among your fellow Starfinders, and click on the notification bell icon to be updated about further entries.
Hey you rascals, thank you for watching our video. Click here to subscribe, click here to watch one of our newer videos, and click here if you feel like watching something random. Have a good day.